Hello.
Hey.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michelle, and I am the moderator for this session. I'm excited to introduce Lisa Howorth and Susan Zurenda, the authors of two wonderful books, Summerlings and Bells for Eli. Thank you to our sponsors, Oxford American, for allowing us to get together today. How are you guys doing?
As well as you can, considering.
We're on technology. We're doing great.
We're figuring it out. We're figuring it out.
We're glad to be doing anything, so thank you so much for the opportunity, really. So
sweet. Yes, we're definitely grateful to the library and the book festival for having us, for sure. Okay, so I guess to start, just to let everybody know, if you have any questions for the authors, please put those in the chat box, and I'll be moderating those questions and making sure that they get answered. So I guess to start, Lisa, we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about you and your book and what you want us to know.
Okay, the book, which is just out in paperback, came out last year actually, is it's a historical novel. Thank you. It's got a new cover for the paperback, but I don't have it with me, so thank you. It's basically an historical novel, as I say, and it's just a small novel in which I've tried to capture a time and a place, which is Washington, D.C. in 1959. And through the eyes, it's a coming of age novel, and it's told through the eyes. Well, it's told, the three major characters are three little boys, 8 and 9. It's a sort of a Lord of the Flies crossed with Stand By Me. And these little boys are trying to negotiate the craziness of the time, the Cold War, and especially in Washington and their neighborhood, where the events of the world play out pretty vividly because it's Washington, and everyone in their old sort of rundown neighborhood is either a possible spy or an FBI operative or diplomats or families that have escaped from Anschluss and the Holocaust in Austria, Dutch Nazi sympathizer, people who have taken positions in the diplomatic corps, a whole host of people, refugees. It's a very unusual situation. At the time, of course, it's very much like it's the neighborhood where I grew up as a kid. I really wanted to capture that because it was so unusual, which somehow didn't occur to me till much later in my life. I thought, damn, that was some crazy stuff that probably most of America didn't have to deal with quite as upfront and close as we did. All the things that were going on with fear of the bombs. There was a World War II hangover with everybody. Who you were in World War II mattered a lot. Those kinds of things. So the kids are all trying to navigate all this craziness, and they hear things. They hear neighborhood rumors, and they're not sure what's true, and they make up their minds about what's true and what's going on themselves. There's also there's an enormous spider infestation across the city, which affects everyone. And there's the boys have decided that it's insect warfare, and it's the Russians who are inflicting this on us. Whether that's true or not, we don't know, but it happens. And they are, of course, wild with glee because they're bug collectors, and this is a huge opportunity for them. And there's it mainly centers on the neighborhood secrets, the things that are going on in the neighborhood, who's really what and what's really going on. And there's the boys the boys are boys, and there's a lot of kid activity, but they hatch some dark plans to deal with a bully in the neighborhood, and there is a tragedy, and possibly that the boys have caused to occur. So basically, that's what it is: coming of age in a different time, a very different time and place than most people would know about.
Yeah, beautiful description. I love how that connects to your experience and how you connected all that. So Susan, tell me a little bit about your book and what you want us to know about Bells for Eli.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be participating on the panel this evening and honored to be with Lisa, and thank you for moderating us, Michelle. And I just want to say the Six Bridges Festival has had the most incredible organization imaginable to make this happen. I've just been wowed by it. But
to make it happen now.
Yes, it's just, I mean, they're so organized. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's been great.
But my novel is also a coming of age story, and it, like Lisa's book, starts in 1959, but her book takes place in a short span in 1959, and mine covers the lives of two first cousins from the time they are quite young until they are in their college years. So at the heart of my Southern novel, our first cousin, Bill and Adeline, who goes by Delia Green, and they grow up across the street from each other in a fictitious in South Carolina that I call Green Branch during the 1960s and early 70s. And, you know, as Lisa, you're talking about it, it was such a different time. And yet, one of the things I've been thinking about recently, while the 60s, late 1959, are now decades removed from us, in 2020, the story, or Bells for Eli, really does present a world that's not completely unlike ours, where ordinary life becomes extraordinary, and characters have to cope with circumstances beyond their control, which we are attempting, of course, to do today. In my novel, after a life-altering childhood accident in which Eli drinks Red Devil Lye, negligently left in a Coca-Cola bottle on the back steps at his home, and this compromises him both physically and emotionally, as you can imagine. He does live through it, but he, as a child, becomes the target of bullying and torment. And Delia, his cousin, becomes his only friend and his defender. And as they age, because they're so close in childhood, extraordinarily, their relationship grows into one that is deeper, and it brings with it some complicated feelings. By adolescence, Eli's tracheotomy, stomach tube that made him smell bad, the strange string behind his ear that pulled the dilator up and down his esophagus, these things are gone. And he appears normal on the outside. He's got a lot of physical and emotional scars on the inside, but he becomes quite the heartbreaker with a double standard as he guards Delia's vulnerability when she ventures into a destructive romantic relationship. So at every turn, Eli assumes the role of protector to Delia when they're adolescents. And determined as he is to rescue his beloved cousin, Delia becomes equally committed, as she always has been, to saving Eli. But in adolescence, when he falls into the wrong crowd, enamored with drugs. So their relationship throughout, as the novel continues, really grows into an incomparable love, and it blossoms into an intimacy that cannot be, for they know to love one's cousin is taboo. And as they become adults, more or less, 20, 21 years old, Eli's wounds of the heart never leave. And they become the catalyst for decisions that bring the novel to a pretty staggering conclusion. And Delia discovers a shocking family secret that reveals truths about Eli she has not ever known.
Both of your novels were so beautifully written and also absolutely heartbreaking in their stories. Both books touched on some pretty taboo topics at that time. I can imagine, as someone who was not around during that time, I can imagine that some of these topics were things that just weren't discussed and they weren't talked about.
Right.
So for each of you, how do you think the behavior and the stigma and the things that the characters in your books had to deal with, how do you think that that compares to how things are now? Like you mentioned, Susan, how, you know, it's not that different, even though situations may be different. Some of it's very similar and mirrors some of those situations. So how can you compare those topics in your book to what we're experiencing in 2020? And Susan, I'll let you go first this time.
Okay. In the 60s, okay, children are tormented and bullied today. They are, but we're more sensitive to it, I believe. In the 60s, I think there was more of the belief that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And, you know, you might say, oh, he'll get over that. He'll toughen up. He'll be all right. Today, we have more sensitivity to it, even though I was a school teacher for 33 years. Yes, there is still bullying and torment, but there are more rescue valves than there were. And also, I think in the 60s, counseling, the idea of talking to a counselor was almost taboo. You know, you didn't, especially in the South, you didn't uncover your dirty laundry. You didn't act weak. You acted like, and that's part of the 50s and 60s too. You acted like everything was perfect, even of course it wasn't. We're human beings. And I think today we are more open. We may be in more conflict with each other openly, but we bring it out there, and it's not hidden, I think, as much as it was. That doesn't mean human nature changes. It's just in the way we treat things. Does that make sense?
Perfect. Lisa?
I would say there were vast differences for me in the then and now, as far as culture and especially as far as the lives of children. This is another reason I want to write this book, because we in the 50s just ran amok, and very little supervision, and we didn't have the worries that people have today about children. So we were very free, but along with that freedom came the freedom to get in a hell of a lot of trouble, and that's what these kids do. But also there are some similarities. There's a lot that resonates today in Summerlings, and I started this book in 2015, before the election of 2016, and before all the worries and talk about Russians interfering in elections, and refugee problems, and immigrant problems, and the fear that we have now. It's crazy, but as I researched the novel, there's a lot of history and political background to this book. As I researched, the more I researched, and as time went on, I realized, God, there's so much that resonates today. All of these things, and especially it's increased. It's become so obvious to me that the fear we experience now is so much like the fear we felt in the 50s, worrying about, we were very close to constantly worrying about war, especially in Washington, where we knew we'd be blown up, the first place blown up in another nuclear event. And I'm feeling that now. I'm experiencing so much of that now. And I stumbled on lots of just little incidents that occurred back then that made me feel like things really aren't so different now, politically and ethically. And it does, it gives you a lot to think about. And to me, right now, it's helped me to think, we did come through some awful stuff. We came through, I was born right after the war, and we came through all kinds of terrible things. We came through, as kids especially, the kinds of worries and the feeling that we weren't going to be around much longer, that we experience now. But we did come through, was the message, and I think that's maybe a helpful one now for people to read and remember, that things have been really scary before, and somehow we pull our asses out of the fire and go on. So
that is a really resonant message. Thank you. Speaking of, kind of, you mentioned briefly, and you both mentioned, both books are from the perspective of children, or are adult books written about children's situations. So, Lisa, what attracted you to writing a book from that perspective? You mentioned that you thought this story really needs to be told, but what made you tell it from that perspective instead of from your perspective today?
Well, for one thing, there's nothing better than writing and reading about kids and their craziness, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I've just always loved it. Everything from Dickens and some of his child characters, Huckleberry Finn, and the shows that we watched now and then, Leave It to Beaver on up, and as I mentioned, Lord of the Flies and Stand By Me, which have been two of my favorites, but movie and book. But their children are just so wonderful as characters, because they have no filters. They have a lack of guile. They just, and therefore they are the voice of truth so often. But at the same time, they're the voice of whatever they think reality is. You know what I mean? They come up with their own truth, but they also are pretty reliable about speaking the truth about what's going on around them, sometimes without even knowing that they're speaking it. And they're funny. Kids are, oh my God, they're just so funny always. And I even in a book with a lot of tragedy and darkness, as mine has, and most of these kids, these little boys, Max, Ivan, and John, they have dysfunctional families, and there's a lot of tragedy for each one of them, some more than others. But there's still, when you're dealing with tragedy, especially for children, the best way out of tragedy, and Caitlin, the best way out, can you all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. My visuals have gone. The best way out is to laugh about it. And that's what these kids do. And it's a good guide as far as looking at children. They give you so many clues to what they're going to be as adults, how things in childhood that have caused them to be the children they are. And this little boy, one of these little boys, John, one of these three little boys, is he's the narrator, and he's telling this looking back as an adult, so it's not entirely narrated, but he's very good at not projecting adult understanding and perspective. In other words, he lets you see it through the eyes of the little boys as they saw it. He doesn't make any adult judgments or explain anything. We just see it as the kids saw it. So
yeah, I love that. Susan, what attracted you to writing a book about children, an adult book?
The inspiration for my novel, it started with a short story many years ago, and that story was inspired by a real first cousin of mine, and the story resonated with me. And my real life cousin Danny, when he was very young, he swallowed red devil light. His father was using it like you use helium to blow up balloons in a Coca-Cola bottle for my cousin's birthday party. Now, he was living in Plainfield, New Jersey, I was living in South Carolina. I was in no way a firsthand witness to any of it, nor would I have been any good anyway. I was a little girl myself. But through the years, I would visit, my cousins would visit, and they did finally, when they were older, when my cousin was older, moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, which was only an hour or so from me. And he and I got to be good friends in adolescence. So I wanted to look at how a really horrible tragedy like that, and in fact, in real life, my aunt and uncle were told to institutionalize my cousin and that he would never live a normal life. And that wasn't true. He became, on the outside, just like Eli, a very normal teenager. But I'm not a psychologist, but I wanted to look at how something that happens to you, a tragedy like that when you were very young, more or less sets the trajectory of not only your life, but the lives of those close around you. And so that was the inspiration for starting in childhood. Now, like Lisa's book, my first person narrator, Delia, she's 21 years old, and she's looking back on her and Eli's growing up years together. And I think sometimes we're often in the head of the child, Delia, as she grows until, we get to the day in 1978 when we're with her as she is as a young woman. But my main reason was really to look at how a tragedy, very young in life, can set the trajectory. And again, back in the 60s, I don't know that people really thought about the consequences of childhood trauma, that it really existed. Like I said, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, I think was the idea. People just thought, well, you'll grow up and you'll grow out of it. But PTSD is not just about war. It comes in many shapes and forms, and Eli is certainly a victim of childhood PTSD, both medically from all the things he has to undergo, and emotionally from the way he's treated.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so for both of you, besides your main character, your narrator, what was your favorite character to write into your novel? So, Susan, what was your favorite character besides Delia?
I think for me, developing Eli's mother, Mary Lily, she just kind of, I didn't know really when I started who she was going to be or how she was going to be. I knew she was going to be aristocratic. Eli is from an aristocratic Southern landed background, and Delia is the child of first generation college parents, and Delia's mother's brother, her blood uncle, who is really beneath Mary Lily's station. They marry. They are high school sweethearts. He goes off to war, and then they marry, much to her family's chagrin. But as Mary Lily just develops into this gracious woman, this Juilliard musician who is a typical woman of the 60s, whatever you're given in life, you're going to cope with, and you're going to make the best of it, and you're not going to give up, and you're not going to give in, and you're going to live with a lot of your misery. And she just, I don't know, I didn't know what she was going to be, and she grew out of almost nothing in my mind. And so I liked writing her. I liked the way she came alive. But if it comes down to it, I guess I like having developed my main characters most of all.
Right. Lisa?
I love my three little boys, but and they were fun to write, but they were very easy. They were not a challenge at all, and they were pretty much based a lot on myself. I had a bunch of brothers, kids in the neighborhood, but I was really intrigued with and challenged by writing about the character Elena, who's a woman living in the neighborhood. She's actually Ivan, one of the little boy's aunts, and they're from the Ukraine and came over escaping Stalin. And she was wonderful. The little boys are in love with her, madly in love with her. In fact, everybody's in love with her, which there's some issues about. possibly the suggestion that she and her own brother are. That's another thing we have in common, is a little hint of incest in our book.
Dealing with those taboo relationships.
Lots of taboo topics are talking about in these two books for sure.
It just occurred to me. But Elena is, she's gorgeous, she's cultured, she's just an extraordinary, exotic person, and she's the only one. She's a mother figure for two of the little boys. Ivan doesn't have a mother, really much of a mother. His mother has died fairly recently, and John's mother is away in an institution in St. Elizabeth's, supposedly, he's been told, for tuberculosis, a TB sanatorium, but we learn otherwise. But so she's sort of a mother substitute for them. But and she also is one of the only adults in the book who gives them her real attention and pays attention to what they're doing. The rest of the adults are pretty much like, just don't get into trouble. That's pretty much their way at looking at the kids' lives. But she was really wonderful to figure out, and she's totally fictional, so I did have to kind of work hard at that. She's certainly not anybody that I was, or that anybody else I knew was. And she worked with refugees, and she went to all the glamorous parties downtown. And but she also, there were other things going on with her, and I don't want to give anything else away, but she had a darker purpose in life. And even though she was this wonderful, positive influence on the boys, she was involved in some unsavory activities and with some unsavory people. So
she's a fantastic character. I loved her.
I did love her character, yes, and the robe, and I loved all of it.
Thank you.
So Lisa, Marion asks, how did you select the name of your book?
Oh my God. I'm not even sure I can claim. I think my husband actually came up with it. We went through, I actually was going to call it Vinegaroons, and my publisher and editor said, no way, nobody knows what that is. A vinegaroon is a kind of a whip scorpion, and a whip scorpion, a terribly poisonous whip scorpion, plays a part in the novel. We went through a whole, oh God, probably dozens and dozens of titles before my husband said, what about just Summerlings, which it seemed okay to everybody, just suggests little beings, creatures running around in the summer being Summerlings. So that seemed okay with everybody, and we went with that. So
nice. Susan, did you have a list of alternate titles for your book as well, or was it always Bells for Eli?
No, it always had the word bells in it, but it ended up Bells for Eli. Eli is a musician, like his mother. He loves percussion more than anything. He is obsessed with the sound of bells, and he is a risk taker, which is one of the consequences sometimes of childhood trauma, because you don't want to go back and think about what was. So you take risks, and he climbs bell towers and does all kinds of things. But I also hope that bells, the different levels and meanings of bells, resonate throughout the novel in a symbolic way. You know, a bell is a kind of a connection between heaven and earth. And, you know, I hope that comes through, that he's literally a percussionist who loves bells, but there are some symbolic overtones as well. And I guess I won't say them, because I guess that would give away things in the book.
Gotcha. What was the most difficult thing about writing your novel? Maybe the most difficult character to write, or just what was the hardest part of writing your novel? Susan, I'll go back to you.
There are various and different difficult things about writing the novel. I actually, when I finished the initial manuscript, and my agent, you know, loved it. She said the way it was, but I ended up adding a subplot of mystery into the book, and it was quite an undertaking to do that. I just really almost had to undo the book and redo the book, and I, I fought it, but in the end, I know it was the right thing to do. I was not dissatisfied with the ending of Bells for Eli originally. I was fine with it, but once I added the pretty extensive subplot into the book, the novel ended itself. It came to this conclusion. I mean, it just wrote itself on its own one night. And I thought, well, there you go. It needed it. And it was worth the months of revision to do it. Or at least, at least I think it was the right thing for the book. So that was difficult. It was challenging, but quite satisfying in the end. The most difficult character for me to write was Uncle Gene, Delia's Uncle Gene, who is married to Eli's mother, Mary Lily. I didn't like him. And the more I developed him, the more I didn't like him. But he's not a flat character. He's not meant to be a villain. He's meant to be a human being. And I just had a lot of trouble having sympathy for Gene. And I knew I had to find it, or I couldn't make the character work. And there was a scene on Halloween Day when Delia and Eli are leaving school, and Eli's father shows up, and all of a sudden, in writing that scene, I understood that he's alcoholic, Gene is, and is dysfunctional. As he is, he's really not a father who really, I don't even know if he knows how to do things the right way for Eli. But I realized in that scene that he loves his son in whatever way he's able. He loves his son, and he's ridden with guilt because it is, after all, really his fault that Eli has the accident. And so after that scene in which he just comes into the schoolyard, it's a bad scene. It was a hard scene to write, but I felt for him and I understood his humanity, and it got a lot easier after that.
I have to say that I didn't have much trouble at all writing this book. It's, for one thing, it's a very small book, and as Susan pointed out, it really only takes place over a week. I did have to do a lot of historical research, but I love historical research. In fact, I have to be hit on the head to stop doing it and sit down and actually write. But I didn't really have much trouble, and I'll tell you, it was refreshing and exhilarating to me because my first novel was written. It's basically a messy novel about messy people doing messy things in a messy world. And it also relied on a backstory of an awful family tragedy that occurred in my family. My 9-year-old brother was molested and murdered. And that book was so hard for me to write and was constantly with me. And it was just awful. So it makes thinking about that, it made this book much, it was a relief. It was a relief to write this book. So I can't complain. It was hard. It wasn't.
Speaking of that, Marion asks, how long did it take for you to write your book?
My first, I guess I am. This little one just took me, I guess about 2 years. Of course, the process is forever. It's more like 4 years between when you start a book and, with selling it and all that, and then the production. It takes forever, unless you're John Grisham and they're grinding them out. Yeah, right. But it didn't take me that long. But like I said, it's a simple book. So my first book took me. Of course, I had children around then. My children are all gone now, grown and gone, and it took me probably 15 years to really write it. So it was, yeah.
Susan, how long did it take you to write Bills for Eli?
Well, as I said, I think the story resonated with me for years. But writing the actual manuscript, I wrote it over the course of maybe 4 or 5 nights a week over about a year. And I don't advocate my writing schedule, if you can call it that, to anybody. You're supposed to get up in the morning early, drink coffee, write, discipline for several hours and however much a day. And that just, I don't know, didn't work for me. I write at night. I still do that when everything's gotten dark and there are no distractions. And so I would start maybe after dinner, sometimes before, and I would stop at midnight or 1 in the morning or 2 in the morning. Sometimes my husband would say, well, did you come to bed last night at all? But I mean, Lisa knows this. You get in a zone some nights and you just keep on going until you drop, or until the wine runs out, whichever comes first. But it took about a year under that kind of schedule to write the original manuscript. And then after my agent took the book and, sometime after that decided to add the subplot, that was a couple of 3 months of reworking and rethinking the novel. And then, like Lisa said, it of course it takes a long time to get the book sold, and it's a long process.
Are either of you, Susan, I'll start with you. Are you currently working on any other books? Or I know that your book's just come out. So have you started another project, or are you just concentrating on this one for now?
Well, I've been concentrating on this one because it debuted with the pandemic. Right. And it's been very hard to get in front of readers when nobody knows who you are because you're a debut novelist. So I've spent a lot of time on social media and virtual, events and things like that. But yes, I am working on a second novel, which will not be a historical. It won't be in a period before this one. I do want to set it before technology took over in the classroom. So I've set it around 2012, and I'm really challenging myself to try to tell this book from 3 points of view. An English teacher who is nothing like me. She's a lot funkier and nicer, I think, than I am. And a very privileged, very brilliant white teenage senior in high school, and an impoverished biracial girl. And these two meet in in-school suspension, somewhere this boy never thought he would find himself. But he and his cohorts have been, who are called the Hateful Eightful in the book, have been quite challenging to all their teachers. So that's what begins it. And I'm maybe 10 chapters or so into it. Please. Has no title. I'm calling it When the School Day Ends, but that's just something to work with. That's not going to be the title.
Yeah.
I am working, I've got a lot of stories, short stories, and I've been working on those, but I'm really mad at myself because you'd think that with the pandemic, you'd have all kinds of time to work on whatever, but sorry, but I haven't been that way. I've been so distracted that I don't know, I can't seem to work as well as I'd like to be. And I don't know if I have COVID brain or what it is, but my vocabulary seems to have decreased. It's I don't know, it's really frustrating. And I'm also working on, well, I haven't really started working on putting together my requests for a book of essays, but I don't want to tell you about it yet because it's going to be fun, a very fun book of essays by other writers, and has to do with children. And I think that'll be fun. But I'm looking forward to getting back to a place where I can work on my fiction because I love that.
I have felt the same way, Lisa. I mean, for a long time, I would do the stuff for Bells for Eli and do a lot of writing, related to the book, but I couldn't get started. And everybody said, why aren't you using this time to get started? Well, finally I have, but it has taken me months. I have been just, that's a good way to put it, COVID brain. So distracted, so unable to focus on what I want to focus on.
Yeah, it's weird. It took me by surprise. But also, I had the same problem that you have, even though my book came out last year. The paperback came out this summer, and of course, I missed a lot of the event for the hardback that were shut down. But it's just, I don't know, no point in talking about it. But it's a hard time, and I had to spend a lot of time during the pandemic sending out books that the publisher, they pretty much said, you're on your own now with promoting this book. So that, anyway. Same for everybody. I don't mean to sound whiny about it, but
no, we're all in this boat together, whether we're authors or whether it's something else. We are all deeply affected.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of promotion, I would love if you both could read a small passage from your book. If you've chosen something, we have about 20 minutes left. We have another question, but I thought I would let you both read a little excerpt from your book. Lisa, we'll start with you if you have something.
Okay. I think I'll start with, I thought about reading it, introductory stuff, but I've pretty much told you all of that, who it's about and where it's about and all that. I think I'll start with a little scene, a scenario of John, the little boy who's one of the three little characters, and he's having bachelor night with his grandfather, who he calls Bricky, and his grandmother Dimma is out for the night, and most of the people I refer to are various neighbors in the neighborhood. And John has just had the unfortunate experience of a near drowning experience at Rehoboth Beach. That was one of the many things that happens to these little boys over the course of this summer. And so anyway, he's got a huge splinter in his foot, and he and his grandfather are at home having bachelor night, and this is how it goes. Bricky and I were having what he called bachelor night, which meant that he'd make hamburgers and hash browns for dinner, and we'd eat honeymoon ice cream and watch TV together. Bricky loved Peter Gunn because Gunn was a private detective who dressed cool and had a lounge singer girlfriend, and sometimes in the lounge there were real-life famous jazz musicians playing. I would rather have been watching Sugarfoot or Bat Masterson, or Bricky's other favorite show, Behind Closed Doors, which was based on the experiences of an actual U.S. naval intelligence officer who caught spies and busted up Russian plots, but for some reason had gone off the air. Bricky, who knew the guy the show was based on, said he'd either run out of stories or the Russians had gotten him. But I let Bricky have his way, and if we watched Peter Gunn, I'd get to stay up later. Okay, mister, Bricky said, let's get this operation over with before our show comes on. Rats, Bricky, I don't want to. I don't want to either, but what we want doesn't particularly matter. What your grandmother wants is law, as you ought to know. Give me that foot. I stuck out my leg across his lap. This is going to hurt me more than it hurts you, he said, putting on his reading glasses. That's such a giant lie. Bricky chuckled, unwrapping a clean towel in which Dimma had left the instruments of torture, a gleaming sewing needle and tweezers, cotton balls, and peroxide. All you have to do is hold still and I'll have it out in a second. Oh, sure. I was trying not to cry. Picking up Dimma's sterling table lighter, Bricky clicked it and held the needle in the flame to sterilize it. Then he unceremoniously poked the needle into my foot, and of course I shrieked and tried to jerk away. He had a good grip on me, though. Could you try being just a little stoic? What's that? I whimpered. Stoic means you try to endure things that hurt and don't let them bother you. He dug around and squeezed the inflamed spot, drawing pus and blood. Ow, 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 I yelled. Stoic sounds like stupid to me. I was about to say that he should be sorry for torturing me since I'd nearly died at the beach, but I thought better of it. I tried to concentrate on the top of Bricky's head, where his faded red hair had thinned, so I could see the tender geography of his scalp, the moles and age spots, which gave me a pang. Ricky traded the needle for the tweezers and plucked the splinter out, holding it up triumphantly. Mission accomplished. Then he rubbed some peroxide in the wound hard with a cotton ball, causing another ow, and stuck a Band-Aid on it. Dr. Dimmo was right. It was infected. See, that took all of 4 minutes, you big baby. He laughed and patted my leg. Humph. The next time you get something cut open, I'm going to laugh at you like your hemorrhoids. I would not advise that, Ricky said. Now let's have some honeymoon and watch the show. He went to the kitchen to get our ice cream, and I used the time to soak a new cotton ball in peroxide and stroke it across my hair, thinking I might achieve a blondish Troy Donahue look. Elena would love it. Ricky returned with 2 big bowls. Are you sure Peter Gunn won't be too frightening for you? He teased. The only thing I'm frightened of right now is you, I said. He gave me an ice creamy chortle and we waited for Peter Gunn to begin. I hoped you managed to have some fun at the beach before you were so tragically wounded. I thought, if you only knew, but said, I met one of the guys who dropped both bombs on Japan. Really? He seemed interested. Was it your father's friend from Baltimore? Lieutenant Besser? He's a hero. That's nice you got to meet him. I don't get it about heroes. He didn't save anybody. Well, what he did put an end to the war, so he saved a lot more Americans from dying. Just what my father had said. I thought about our war reenactments, like the cruel debacle with the Dutch boys, when we pretended their airstream was a gas chamber and locked them in. We like war, but it's playing it the same as guys having real wars. I mean, why do people keep having them? You boys playing war is different. You're just children and you like winning like a baseball game. There are real wars because people have to protect what's important to them. And war is terrible. No one likes it. It didn't seem so different to me. But America likes winning too. Ricky shook his head. There's always going to be a lunatic around to start something like Hitler, and something has to be done about it. Americans don't start wars. We end them. Why can't we just do like the Romans? You just put the presidents and kings and dictators in a ring like gladiators and let them fight it out. Whoever doesn't die wins, and all the regular people don't have to get killed. It doesn't work that way, but philosophically, it's a good idea. I was glad to get some credit for a change. Ricky plucked at a nostril, and feeling that I now had the moral high ground, I said, Stop picking your nose, Ricky. I am not picking my nose, John. I had an itch, and you're certainly not one to talk about nose picking. I still had my doubts and persisted with my interrogation, but it seems like people do like war. Bo Shreve said his dad said that American spies knew that Pearl Harbor was going to happen, but nobody tried to stop it because we wanted to get in the war. Yes, I know that theory. It's very complicated, son. You'll understand when you're older. I hated that answer, which I often got from my grandparents. I'll stop there because we need to be short.
It was a great
So,
passage. I loved that. I loved that part of the book. That was really funny, the interaction between him and his grandfather.
Yeah, it was fun to write.
Susan, please share part of your book with us.
Okay. Since I've talked about Eli's accident catapulting the action of the book, I thought I would read the section after he has drunk the lie and what is happening. That red devil lie in the Coca-Cola bottle Mr. Jean done left on the back stoop, I heard him say, for them balloons. And then for a while, I could not follow Pot's words until I heard Mr. Eli drunk some of it. I heard Eli breathing, even from across the street. I thought he was choking because his face was contorted, his cheeks sucking in. My God, oh God, help me, Pot. Get Ellison into the house. Milk, he needs milk, Mary Lily screamed. My mother began to run toward our house, pulling me by the hand. What is Red Devil lie? I sputtered as I slipped and staggered alongside her, trying to keep my arm in its socket, but she didn't answer. Inside the house, she made a call, and I heard her say the name of our street. Then she sat with her head in her hands. What is Red Devil lie? I asked again. It cleans drains, but my brother must have been using it to blow up balloons for the party. Did Uncle Gene hurt Eli? I asked. I'm sorry, baby, she said, and smoothed my hair. I can't explain it. I have to be quiet and think what to do. She picked up a pencil and paper and began to write. The next thing I remember was the deafening shriek of the ambulance siren and Mama jolting from her chair. Again, she grabbed my hand and began to run. I kept up better this time, and unlike before, we crossed the street. Yet we stood back, waiting. I watched terrified as two men in white waist-length coats brought Eli out on a stretcher. His arms bent in at the elbows and stuck out like wings. I saw his mouth opening and closing, and then he vomited on himself. I heard him heaving. One of the men took the bottom of the sheet covering Eli and wiped away the yellow spew. Mary Lily hurried behind the stretcher, but before she climbed into the ambulance, she looked toward Mama. She was crying while she talked. Call Dr. Crawford and tell him we are on our way to the hospital in Columbia, not Green Branch. My mother and everybody else in town worshiped Dr. Crawford. Tell him what? I asked Mama. Tell him Eli has had an accident, she said. Her face pulled taut with something like reproach, or maybe it was only sorrow and fear. I was too young to define it. Yet I remember the way her eyes stared out at nothing, her mouth open and grimaced, and knowing somehow she was thinking about both Eli and Uncle Gene. What is wrong with him? I asked. Her head snapped around. The life. It's likely burned everything in its path through his body, she said. He's burned like in a fire? I asked. Maybe there was fear in my voice because Mama clamped shut and would say nothing more. She looked at me curiously, but she didn't speak. Young as I was, I recognized she had told me a gruesome truth she hadn't meant to tell her child. Mama had to go inside to make calls to find her brother. I thought about my cousin Eli, how poison going down your throat would feel if it burned everything on its way. Like fire, it would turn things black, your tongue, your throat, and maybe your veins would turn from blue to black. I'd seen what weed poison did to plants in Mary Lily's garden. Pot never let us come near when he sprayed, but I'd seen afterward what it did to once green life. It turned things brown and dry, then black like ash, and then they were dead. I stared at the spot where the ambulance had parked. I wiped at my eyes. But when I noticed the arc of blue, green, and violet spread in the road, rainbow oil lying slick in a thin puddle settled in a dip in the street from a thunderstorm during the night, I felt consoled because I knew the meaning of rainbows. I would not imagine Eli turning to black ashes inside, even as my own throat clenched, feeling charred and dry.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Both of your books are so good. I'm truly honored to have been able to read both of them and to share this space with you and hear you talk about your books. It's been really nice. One last question we had for Lisa was the spider incident truth or fiction?
As far as I was concerned, it was totally fiction. But at some point, somebody clued me in to the fact that there had been some kind of a spider infestation in Washington in 1957, but I knew nothing about it, and it couldn't have been like this. It couldn't have been as cool as my spider. I had everybody in the city in an uproar about it, and I don't remember anything about one 2 years earlier. So, and I need to check on that, see what really happened in 1957. So.
Yeah. Looks like we have about 7 more minutes. So if anyone has any more questions, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, ladies, I'll let you have the floor and just to say whatever you want to say.
Well, before we go off, I want to thank you and everybody at Six Bridges for having me. I really appreciate it. Like I said, desperate times require desperate self-horn tooting, and without these kinds of venues, there would be nothing right now. So appreciate it so much.
And I ditto what Lisa says. I'm just honored to be part of the Six Bridges Festival, and we are living in very difficult times, and books help us. They teach us what it means to be human. What we read resonates with us and helps us to connect to each other and to understand the world better. And as Lisa pointed out earlier, and maybe I did too, though both of our books are set decades away from where we are now, human nature has not changed. And the way we deal with, as Lisa's book, with the Cold War, or with mine, which it seems to be an insular time in the 1960s and 70s, when, you know, your middle class America is all, and upper middle class are all achieving the American dream. This is also the time when the counterculture is encroaching, and when sit-ins with African Americans, or the fight for native lands with the Native Americans, or women's first beginnings of the women's movement, all these things are coming in, and people were stirred up then, and it's all about trying to understand each other. And I just know of no better way than literature to help us do that.
Thank all of you. Thank all of you who are here for this virtual event. I appreciate it so much, and I know Susan does too. Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate it so very much. And Michelle, thank you for leading us so well.
Thank you for having me, Lisa. One of our attendees mentions that her book club read your book and they really enjoyed it.
I see that. I'm so grateful. Thank you. I appreciate it. Now you can go read Susan.
Now your book club needs to read Books for Eli. It's a great accompaniment. They work beautifully together. I loved reading them back to back.
Thank you.
Well, I guess that's all I have. It's the first time I've ever been early for anything in my life. So,
I'm glad your sound worked out.
Yes, mine too, and I'm glad that you that we all got here, and it seems to be pretty bump free.
Yeah. Well, I thank my daughter-in-law to be Caitlin O'Brien. So be here.
And
to help
it's
me.
As challenging as all this technology can be, because I'm not at home, I'm on the road with book events, and I'm actually in Cassandra King Conroy's home, who was kind enough to let me come use her wireless tonight. So even though all these things are a challenge and we don't know if we can pull them off, isn't it cool? You know, that Lisa can be in Oxford and I can be in South Carolina and the Low Country, and you can be in Arkansas. That's the cool part about it.
Yes, we make it work.
Okay, guys.
Okay.
Carry on.
Onward and upward.
Right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank y'all. Bye-bye.
Bye.